On June 7, 2015, the legendary actor Sir Christopher Lee passed away at the age of 93. Christopher Lee was one of the most awesome people of the 20th or 21st centuries. He was an elite British Royal Air Force intelligence officer in World War II, providing vital coordination and morale for successful campaigns in Sicily and Northern Africa, and even served in Churchill's so-nicknamed Brigade of Ungentlemanly Warfare, which to this day is still mostly classified. His, 7-decade acting career contains a breadth and power that most actors would give any number of limbs for, with iconic roles such as a vampire lord, a wizard of Middle-earth, a Bond villain, and a fallen Jedi. He was renowned for his dignified persona and deep, melodic voice, as well suited for singing and voice roles as acting, and for continuing to work and create well into his 90s. But my first experience of Christopher Lee's mighty talent was long before I even knew of him. When I was little, I watched the afternoon kids shows on our ABC network, and two of my favorite programs were Cosgrove Hall Films' animated adaptations of the Terry Pratchett novels Soul Music and Weird Sisters. I remember loving the character of Death, this easygoing, slightly weary Grim Reaper who somehow has a mortal granddaughter and who, in one episode, desperately tries to find out how to forget, and I learned much later that he was voiced, magnificently as you'd expect, by Christopher Lee. As a young teenager in the early 2000s, I then mainly knew of Lee as Saruman, Gandalf's nemesis in Lord of the Rings, and the traitorous Count Dooku in the Star Wars prequels. He was arguably the best part of either series, and in the case of the latter, Lee's noble, composed intensity could elevate even George Lucas's writing. But in 2009, I saw The Wicker Man, and it became one of my favorite films. Lee considered it to be his best film, and reportedly played the role of Lord Summerisle for free, both because he didn't want to be typecast in supernatural horror, and because the role was written specifically for him. I felt compelled to watch it again earlier today, at time of writing, and it's still as good as ever. The visuals are sumptuous, the folk-style score is elegant and playful, and the film's subtle tension is riveting. There is a constant, mounting tone of foreboding and unease, as the townsfolk of Summerisle seem not quite right, and Inspector Howie finds many suspicious conflicting details of a young girl's disappearance, yet you are still inspired by the pageantry and colourful passion of the island's pagan traditions. The Wicker Man can be beautiful, disquieting, and terrifying all at once, especially in the climax. Edward Woodward is stoic and direct as Inspector Howie, and Lee plays a leader of phenomenal sophistication and gravitas. Rewatching The Wicker Man was a pleasure, but I felt I almost owed it to Lee's memory, and my film critic acumen, to check out some of his other important films. Until now, I had only seen the Coppola Dracula film, out of the straight adaptations of Bram Stoker's novel, and Hammer Horror's 1958 Dracula film, released as Horror of Dracula in the US, is way better. I really liked this Dracula film. As with The Wicker Man, it's suspenseful and beautifully presented, with rich colors and lavish Gothic set design. Dracula himself is more of a simple predator in this than the anti-hero of other interpretations, and Lee has few lines, but he superbly conveys the savagery and seductive masculinity intrinsic to the character. Lee was born to play Dracula, with his piercing stare, wiry strength, and the way he almost flows from place to place. The wasting away of Lucy and then Mina, and the awareness that Dracula is lurking somewhere out there, keep the tension high and ensure that his evil presence is always felt. I've never been a James Bond fan, as the franchise doesn't interest me much. That being said, I really enjoyed The World Is Not Enough when I was younger, Casino Royale and Skyfall are great films, and if I had to pick a favorite Bond, it would probably be Timothy Dalton. I recently watched The Man with the Golden Gun, Roger Moore's second film as Bond, and which features Lee as acclaimed Bond villain Francisco Scaramanga. The Man with the Golden Gun isn't very good. I can't speak with too much certainty about Moore's performance, as this is the only Bond film of his I've seen so far, but he's rather flatly posh and uninteresting in this, though he does have good chemistry with Britt Ekland, who is an attractive and assertive Bond girl. The plot is poorly structured and the pacing is limp, with the solar power plot thread awkwardly crowbarred in, and Scaramanga pretty much complicating his own plans by putting the hit/invitation on Bond. Also, the comic relief character of Sheriff J.W. Pepper is like nails on a chalkboard. Despite these major flaws, the film has great sets, some vivid scenes of destruction, and a couple of awesome fight scenes, and Lee is excellent as Scaramanga. Dignified as always, Lee plays Scaramanga as deviously clever, more so than Bond, and gleefully self-assured, yet charming and well-mannered at all times. The final act does a good job of framing Bond and Scaramanga as counterparts. Both are talented killers, and merely their justifications are different. The Man with the Golden Gun is rather bad, but the man himself is brilliant. Christopher Lee was a prolific singer, performing in the soundtracks of many of his films, and, more awesomely, collaborating with metal bands such as Manowar and Rhapsody of Fire in his later years. He loved metal, and released a symphonic metal album at the age of 87. Charlemagne, by the Sword and the Cross, is a majestic concept album dramatizing the life of King Charlemagne, the first Holy Roman Emperor, from whom Lee is distantly descended. It's a tiny bit rough, but it's a dramatic and enthralling work, and Lee's booming voice works equally well for the heavy metal choruses and the orchestral segments. This is one of my favorite albums, and it's another powerful part of Lee's legacy. Of course, I've barely scratched the surface of Christopher Lee's life and career, and have only seen a fraction of his films. Lee considered his most important film to be Jinnah, a biopic about the founder of Pakistan, but I couldn't watch it because I couldn't find a copy. Lee climbed a close-to-eruption Mount Vesuvius during his military service. He met J.R.R. Tolkien, who gave Lee his blessing to play Gandalf in any film of Lord of the Rings. Lee went on to play Saruman, but still. In his work in the Star Wars prequels, Lee did most of his action scenes himself, which is very impressive as he was in his 70s then. The word legend is often overused, given to people who have done little or not been around for long, but Lee truly deserves the description of legend. He is succeeded by his wife Birgit Kronk-Lee and their daughter Christina Lee, who, incidentally, narrated the Charlemagne album. Rest in peace, Sir Christopher Lee. You led a fuller life than most of us would hope for with 10 of them. Thanks for watching. Cheers.